I guess it's a no-brainer that I would choose to speak for this topic, because I personally feel that in a room full of, having taught and worked and studied in a room full of classrooms which were mostly male, I've always wondered if it would make a difference if there was actually a reservation for women to be in the classroom. And yes, if the world was ideal and there was equal opportunity and everybody could come in and go in any way they wanted to, then reservations make no sense. Everybody should come by merit. But the world is not ideal and the opportunities that are there are not equal. So from the day a baby girl is born, you all know the ratios across states. The richer the state, the worse the ratio. Some of you might have seen the newspaper today. There was a little baby who was found left to be in the garbage bin, or not in the bin, actually left in the field to basically be eaten by dogs or whatever, but rescued fortunately. There are differences in how the girl is treated. In the most, people who say that they really don't think there are any differences between boys and girls are also very happy when a boy is born in the home. And therefore, I would say that irrespective of, even if I don't take you down the emotional path, I think the reality remains that access to education, to opportunity, and all of that is not the same for a girl as compared to a boy. I'm sure some of you know the data that even in our CAT applications, only 25% of the applications are actually women applications. And therefore, out of the 25%, if we get 12% as our students, we actually are doing very well. But the reality is that why is it that when there are 50% women in the population, only 25% actually apply to even come to an institute like the IIM? And therefore, what I'm saying is that systematically there are barriers put for this girl to actually compete as an equal before she even enters the classroom. And therefore, it is important that if somebody has a barrier, if somebody has not been given equal opportunity, that she or he or whoever we are looking at, and in this case, of course, it is a woman, that she be given a little more help. And it's not just because they have not equal access, but it is also, if I look at it from just the education perspective, it would make for a much better classroom if we had more diversity of perspectives in the classroom. And when we have only one kind of perspective, it affects the way the classroom also works. So the pedagogy can be different, the issues that can be raised can be different, and as a result, because there are very few women in the classroom, their ability to also then make a difference in the corporate or wherever they get to work also gets reduced. So if organizations are also interested that the talent that they spend, the money that they spend in building the talent doesn't get wasted, because a lot of the women who actually enter the workforce never actually make to the top, it also makes sense for them to actually, for us to have more women in the classroom. If there are more, they will also be much more represented in the workforce, and if there are more women in the classroom and in the workforce, I think the environment for the women changes. And because the environment is different, therefore they can't do. So I think I would just say that it makes a lot of sense, both economically and socially, to have gender-based admission policies. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The resolution before us is if gender-based admission policies in educational institutions justified. And we are speaking against that. I'll be talking about self-respect. I'll be talking about the need for in different levels of education, the need for different policies. I'll be talking about the effectiveness of such policies. My friend Aniket will be talking about the redundancies and the challenges involved in such policies, and he'll be also taking up the morality and the diversity aspect. Just like to start with a quote from Gloria Steinem, the noted feminist and author, who said this in an address called Women in America. She said, "Sex and race, because they are easy, visible differences, have been the primary ways of organizing human beings into superior and inferior groups." She also goes on to say that we are talking about a society in which there will be no roles other than those chosen or those earned. We are really talking about humanism, she says. Are we talking about humanism? Are we talking about a level playing field? Is it okay for me to be patronizing and allowing somebody else to go ahead of any gender? Would that person be really satisfied? What a self-respecting person is actually looking for is equality. They're not looking for discrimination. They're looking for opportunity to prove themselves rather than a backdoor entry. Let's look at different levels of education. You have schools, you have graduation, you have post-graduation. Now, schooling, I believe, is a fundamental right of every citizen. And belatedly, this has been recognized by the Right to Education Bill. We can debate about the effectiveness of implementation, but that's for another day. But I say change is coming, slowly but surely it is coming. According to the figures of UGC, University Grants Commission, for the year 2010, there has been an increase of 70% in enrollment of women compared to the year 2000. At the same time, they say that the number of women in higher education is at 41% compared to 29% in 1991. Now this increase has been across the board, across all streams, and it has nothing to do with any kind of gender-based admission policies. Now post-graduation, I believe, is a luxury item. I mean, you don't really need to be an MBA or a PhD to be comfortable or successful in life. So there is no question, I mean, there should not be the case for any kind of this criteria-based admission policy does not arise there. Having said that, I represent PGPX. We have 6 women in our class, and all of them would be very proud to stand here and say that they have been chosen not because they're women. They have been chosen because they're equal, and in most cases better than the rest 80 of us. And finally, we come to the question of any kind of criteria-based policy. Historically, it has been proven none of them work. Now, across the world, the case in point being the reservation policy that we have. And who benefits from this? It's always the creamy layer. It's always the people who benefit, who keep benefiting from them generation after the other. And finally, I would like to say that any self-respecting individual, what they want is equality and a level playing field rather than any kind of discrimination.
Well, I was hoping to speak against the motion, but let's say, I mean, the topic is in educational institutions, gender-based admission policies in educational institutions are justified. See, it doesn't really say highest levels. It doesn't really say higher education. Now, I can quite easily argue that there are fundamental differences between men and women, between boys and girls. These are genetic. Okay? And in fact, girls tend to be much better in certain areas, boys tend to be better in certain other areas. But even today, most of our tests, because they need to be objectification is a very important criteria, there could be a bias against the particular abilities that women have, okay? Which is really to understand the undercurrents of the conversation, what's going on, be more nurturing, understand empathize and understand with others. And there are many more things, language skills, etc. While boys may have a much better ability in terms of three-dimensional spatial aspects. So there are differences. This is one kind of difference. Let me outline another kind of difference, okay, for which the evidence is much less. Okay. For these, the evidence is much more. But the other kind of difference is, in most kind of situations, an aggregate measure of, let us say, the abilities of boys and girls would put them more or less on par. Okay. Although there are differences in terms of the type of ability. That's what I've already said, but there's something more to it. The distribution of women or girls tends to be much sharper. If there are very few, let's say, extremely dull girls, but there are a lot more dull boys. Okay. And similarly, on the contrary side, there are not too many dull, there are not too many extremely bright, let us say, extreme ability women. Women tend to be much more all round. Now we are talking about education, and I would pick from where Niharika said, there are of course significant biases in society, which we can grant. I mean, I would admit upfront that there are genetic differences, but the point is there are also significant biases in terms of how children are brought up, etc. Some of these kind of further, compound the problem of creating, let us say, a difficulty for women to get into schools. Besides, of course, the motivational aspect, she's supposed to do other things and so on. Why did it? Now, suppose if education was very large and good quality education supply was, the need for reservation would be much less. Okay. But if it is small, then what happens is the boys or those who are at the extreme, let's say 2 sigma level, get an advantage, which means that the bulk of the women, although they are equally bright, in an average sense, would get left off. Therefore, there is a need in a society like ours, where the education resources are scarce, to put the women along with the boys, be that as it may. And I think there is a larger argument also. All classrooms tend to be wonderful if there are sufficient numbers of girls. Okay? And these hostel life and your social life, particularly at higher education, adults, also tends to be. Now, let me say some other point in India. Our universities are quite, not the right places for education because they are highly politicized, etc. There are some good institutions like the IITs, NITs, IIMs, and so on. But these are monodisciplinary. Now, given that fact, the scope economies are not there. Therefore, you cannot really have a college in, let us say, an IIT with far too many girls, if the spatial ability is going to be straight. Since they don't have an option, since you don't have an option to otherwise have girls around because it's a mono-educational school, you need to bring them in. Okay? So, if and when these difficulties are taken care of, the need for reservation will be less. I would just want to make one more point, that it's not so much reservation I'm talking about as much as certain scores. And it still is a point that if we recognize the biases, these scores, handicap scores or whatever you want to call them, need to be there. That's all.
Good evening. So let me go straight away into my constructives. The first being that there is an inherent redundancy or logical inconsistency in any system of positive discrimination. Now, what is the premise of positive discrimination? It says that here is a group of candidates, in this case a particular gender, who ideally would do as well as the candidates who are already admitted to the system and who are of the same caliber and who are of the same quality and the same caliber. and hence they're not getting in, and hence we need a push to get them. So there are three possible cases. Firstly, the test and system is ideal as well as the candidates are qualified, in which case the problem is trivial. You don't need a positive discrimination system. The second is that the candidates are ideal, but there is a problem in the selection procedure, either due to outright negative bias or due to a bias in testing, a bias in the selection process. The third possibility is that the pool of candidates itself is flawed because of historical discrimination and the lack of access to opportunity. So it strikes me that the logical solution to a problem, if you spot it, is to fix the core problem itself. If there is a problem in the testing procedure, you fix the testing procedure. If you feel that your test is not selecting for the skills that every group has, if you feel that your test is biased against any group, fix the test. If you feel that there is any discrimination against any particular group, well, you have in every country, in every constitution, you have laws banning discrimination, you have legal mechanisms, you have enforcement mechanisms. Enforce that. If you feel that any group is being disadvantaged by not being given an opportunity, you fix the opportunity. If there is a problem, you fix the core problem. You don't solve a distortion by creating another distortion. You don't say that, okay, the playing field is not level, so let me dig an incline up the other angle. That doesn't work. So what happens if you start bringing it out is that each subsequent distortion introduces another handicap, introduces second and third order effects, such as my colleague alluded, the capture by the creamy layer, such as an inherent creation of a dependency. So if you have a problem and you identify it, you have to fix the problem, not run around pulling everyone down to the same level. My next argument deals with the morality. The point of a positive discrimination system, no matter whether it's a quota, whether it's a affirmative action, is that at some point you're putting your finger on the scales and tipping it in favor of one particular group. Now, in a universe where there are a finite number of opportunities, here where there are a finite number of seats, that means for every person who is admitted to the system through a positive discrimination, there is another person who was left out or failed to get an admit precisely because of that system. And I feel that is fundamentally wrong. So what are you telling the person or the candidate who who didn't get in? I'm sorry, but unfortunately you belong to a group that someone somewhere has decided is historically disadvantaged. So even though you're qualified, someone else is going to get the seat. So basically you're discriminating against someone precisely because of their membership to a group by birth over which they have no control. That in essence stinks of discrimination, the very kind that you're trying to correct. It doesn't matter who you're arguing against, which group you're targeting it against. And to argue that simply because someone is more likely to have received a favorable education or received opportunities and hence must be discriminated against, or that they in the past discriminated against a particular group, is to visit the sins of the father upon the son, and that is simply not an accepted legal principle or principle of equality anywhere in the universe. And finally, coming to the diversity argument, that having different people of different experiences enriches the entire classroom. There's something to be said for that. But firstly, I don't think that either the presence or absence of a Y chromosome engenders any perspective or insight so drastically different from anyone else. I don't think that the genders are so separated that we can't imagine what it will be like in any other person's shoes. But for the sake of argument, let me grant that maybe in some situations that does happen. So in any institution, what is the percentage of any group, male or female? It's at least 5 to 10%. So inherently, you are bringing that perspective into the classroom, and if you feel that that is not enough, consider what Harvard Business School does. There are 7% engineers, 8% people from government, 5% people from military. In no case does the discrimination and the experience bringing to the classroom of any group exceed double digits. By virtue of them being present by at least 5 to 10%, that perspective is already there. And with that, I explain.
So we'll be breaking for 5 minutes.
Which is brought about in the classroom when more people of the other gender come in. But is it really diverse? I mean, is it what kind of diversity? As my teammate mentioned, that is it really different? I mean, how far away is the thinking? Is it different poles? I mean, PU schools strive for diversity, but diversity of experience. They strive for, people with, like we have people with army background, we have people who have worked in construction, who have worked in IT, who have worked in all kinds of different fields. That's the kind of diversity that they're aiming for. They're not aiming for these kind of diverse, thoughts. That's the counter to that. Then the professor mentioned about the tests and objective tests and the biases involved in that. Well, again, fix the selection procedure. We just have a test at this point. Why not introduce essays, which might be a parameter to judge the person's experience, the person's depth of knowledge, the depth of thought. That might be a nice way to, get in a different set of candidates than the ones that you're currently getting. On an aggregate level, the professor mentioned that the spatial argument that he gave, that because the number of guys are more, most of them tend to get in, but the number of women are less, and they couldn't get into the courses. But again, it is he mentioned this argument when he talked about IITs and IIMs. Now these are elite institutions. I mean, you're talking about 1 billion people. You're talking about a youth population out of 40 or 50% of that, and not all of them can get in. And you should not. That is not an argument for allowing them to get in. Especially, how do you sustain elitism once you allow these kind of discriminatory policies to be present? I think that's
I've had a really good time listening to all the conversations that have been around this topic. And I just want to make a first comment that I wish I had less white hair and I could also be as optimistic about you and just say, well, make it ideal, fix it. Yeah? Can you make it, how do you make it ideal? Do you have solutions? Do you have ideas? And how do you make something ideal which has been not ideal for centuries? Yeah, sure, in poetry I could, but in reality maybe not. And if you're really talking about humanism, because that's where you started, it's not about men, women, it's not about race, caste, but it is about humanism. If we were human, and if it was all about humanism, I don't think we would have had such a thriving trade on the various things that you know about, yeah? Including fetal selection, including prostitution, including all of that. We wouldn't have had that's not a humanistic argument. And the other point that was mentioned by my friends was, it's not just make it a level playing field. Yeah? How do you make something a level playing field? Yeah? How do you start with that? Of course the implementation is going to be very, very tricky. And of course the implementation is not going to be perfect. But if something is not perfect, it doesn't mean that we're not going to try it. And if we are not going to try it, if we don't try it, how do we ever make it perfect? And in fact, as you said, well, these are elite institutions, let them be elite. That's the question. Yeah? Elite at what cost and in what way? I don't understand that. The other thing that you said, again, twice it has come up, that what does the Y chromosome add? Yeah? This is not biological. The diversity we're talking about is not biological. It's a social perspective that a person brings who has been brought up with a different value system, maybe a different worldview, and there is something called masculinity and femininity, which both men and women possess. Yeah? And that is what one is talking about, and it's not about the X or Y chromosome. And anyway, whenever we will want to make a correction, if we ever want to make one, there is going to be displacement. There is going to be a little bit of upheaval on one side or the other. And if you say that, it patronizes somebody to bring in because they are a certain gender, caste or race, and in this case a certain gender, then my question is, what is patronization and who has been patronizing and when would it be time to stop patronizing? And unless we ask these questions and answer them, I don't think we even have a place to start making an argument against or for gender-based admission policies. And you are saying, well, we can teach them up to class 1, class 10, because that is fine, because that is part of right to education. But later they really don't need to make a good life, because only the men need to have to make a good life. I don't even want to say much about it. Yeah? Yeah, but that's the number, and that's exactly my point, you know. And if that is how we want to think about equality, making access available, I don't know what we're talking about. Also, one more point, and then I will stop, and that is about, is discrimination legal? Yeah? Of course it is not legal. But when it happens at a conscious level, we will call it illegal. But when it happens every day, in every walk of one's life, how come it is not, how come we bring the argument that it is illegal? Yeah? It happens. I'm sure every one of us has faced discrimination. We know how it feels to be discriminated against, and ask a woman how it is to be discriminated against. And they will tell you many stories if you have the patience to listen. Yeah? And therefore, so we'll leave it at that.
Just have a small break for the teams to formulate their closing statements. No, it's okay.
As we conclude this debate, there is no doubt that we are seeking to correct a deeply historical flaw that has persisted over the centuries. But as we seek to press the tides of change, we must ensure that we do not at least add to the weight of history that presses down upon us. We must seek to ensure that when we correct the problems of the past, that we don't make the original mistake that they did. And hence, I believe that our argument stands on the lines of universality, stands on the lines of true equality, stands on the legs of self-respect, and it stands on the leg of universality, that everyone, regardless of gender, should be treated the same. No better, but definitely no worse as well. And I think that is the fundamental argument against positive discrimination, that ultimately it succumbs to the same flaw that it seeks to cure, that in fact the remedy is the malady, that you are seeking to correct one wrong with the other, and that is an enterprise that is forever doomed to failure. So perhaps the solution that we propose seem too simple to work. They might appear to be idealistic at first glance. But if one were to apply Occam's razor, it appears that the simplest solutions often are the ones that should work. So it is precisely because there is a deep flaw which has never been addressed, that everyone has in the past has sought to take a shortcut around it, has sought to solve the problem, that the problem has persisted over so many centuries. It is time for us to face this issue head on, and to ensure that while we seek to correct for the balance of the past, we do not discriminate and cause greater harm in the present, that we do not discriminate against people for either being in a particular gender that was historically discriminated, or being against it. And we must seek to ensure that the simplest solutions, the most fundamental problems, are the ones that we seek to address first. It is easy to gaze into the abyss and succumb to the lure of defeatism and say that, look, this is never going to be solved. Let's take the world as it is and tinker around the edges. But true fundamental change is driven by those who said, no, I look at this task, I see the magnitude, and I know that it's difficult, but yet I should change the world to its very foundations and ultimately leave a better place behind. Thank you.
Yeah, well said, but not very practical. If the very process of ascendancy of individuals to a position where they can take decisions is fraught with extreme competition, with lack of empathy in that process of competing with others. And if those are the values that are put up in highly competitive exams of the mass kind, the resilience gift, which by definition would get objectified, which would then work in favor of a particular agenda, then correction is needed right there. But how can correction there happen if those at the top do not recognize it as such? How can that happen if women are not pushed up, at least to start with? Okay? How can the historic social discrimination against women, not that men and women are utterly equal, that's not the point, but how can that discrimination against women, which doesn't allow their own specific abilities, which are often superior to men, for instance, in the language, in empathy, in group behavior of a cooperative type, etc., come to the fore, and spaces be created for them if they themselves don't come up, or they themselves are not allowed to reach positions. So, in India, of course, given the shortage of resources, one answer would be to say that, look, let's work on that. I would agree. But simultaneously, we need to work on bringing women in, particularly because of the bimodal distribution of quality education. There are very few colleges, but there are so few colleges that, given my take on the distribution, okay, you are almost guaranteed not to have enough number of women there. Either expand, they've been saying for the last 30, 40, 60 years we'll expand, we haven't done so. Women can't wait, they need to get educated. They need to compete shoulder to shoulder with men as well. So I'll stop.